Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome. Looks like people are getting their audio connected. And, I don't exactly know how many folks are going to be joining us today. There were about 15 who RSVP'd, and I think some people might come in a couple minutes later, but we are recording this session. There will be plenty of opportunity for interaction and Q&A. So feel free to either throw comments in the chat, or when we get to various points, feel free to unmute and share your camera if you'd like and interact. I am super excited to introduce to you Tatiana Scantlebury, who is joining us to talk a little bit about her role as an SDG 16 ambassador for the United Nations Association of the United States of America. And she's going to give more of an introduction of herself. That's kind of the meat of this presentation today, but it's really about pathways to peace work. And given that we are a peace psychology focused organization, I know a lot of folks are interested in how to get more involved, how to connect, how to find global partners, local partners, and the like. So without further ado, Tatiana, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me. I'm really excited to be participating in this conversation with you and everyone else on this call. And like Stephanie had mentioned, I can give a brief introduction to myself and just about my journey within my work with UNA USA. So I am from the Bronx, New York, but I am of Caribbean descent, and a lot of my journey has been impacted by my upbringing. So I went to school at a historically Black college, Delaware State University, and I received my bachelor's in criminal justice. And I later went on to get my graduate degree in human rights here in John Jay in New York City. And I'll talk briefly about what that looked like for me and how I ended up becoming the SDG ambassador for Global Goal 16. So from a very young age, I've always been interested in just how does justice work. I've learned so much just by watching different shows and also just within my family and like what it looks like with the criminal justice system. So I realized at a young age, I wanted to do something within serving and giving back to my community. And at one point, I was able to meet someone from the Central Park 5 case. And if you are not aware about that, I would definitely encourage you to do some research on that and how young people here in New York City were wrongfully convicted for a crime that they did not commit. And at a young age, I learned about that. And I was like, well, how is this possible? How can our criminal justice system do this to young people? And from that moment, I said, okay, I want to do something within a criminal justice system. I don't know what it would look like. And I jumped between different things. So it was either becoming a homicide detective, to forensic scientist, to juvenile probation, and all of these different things for me, they all aligned in some capacity, but I had to figure that out for myself as I went along college and throughout my education trajectory. So after learning about the Central Park 5 case, I said, okay, I want to study criminal justice, but not knowing what that meant like to become a homicide detective, I was told that I would have to become a police officer. And as you're well aware, within the United States, just the record when it comes to police brutality, I realized that was maybe not the route that I wanted to go, but I still knew that I wanted to help people in some form, in some shape or way. So in undergraduate, studying criminal justice at HBCU, I was exposed to different opportunities. And from there, I was able to study abroad in London. And that opportunity changed my entire scope when it comes to criminal justice. It changed my viewpoints when it comes to international law and international criminal justice. And at that time, I didn't have the language behind whether I wanted to do international human rights or international criminal law, but I knew that I wanted to study this work more extensively. And I learned about the genocide in Rwanda. And that changed everything for me. That moment of learning about what happened when it comes to genocide and what it looks like when it comes to peace, I realized, okay, how can I be more involved? And of course, as a young person, a young professional, there's limited opportunities, right? You have to start off doing internships. So I figured, let me start from the baseline. And what that looked like for me was starting within the juvenile probation system and just working with young people. Now, of course, people are wondering, how does this relate to peace and how does that all connect? But I knew that I still wanted to work in criminal justice. So I figured I have to start locally first. And that's one thing that UNA USA teaches us all the time. We act globally, think locally, right? So those are the reasons why I started off more domestically within my system, within my local community. And I also was able to intern within the Congress office. So that changed a lot of my perspective, both having the political aspect, then also the peace and also the criminal justice. So I did all of these different things in undergrad, and now it's time for senior year. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And I think any senior or in college, there's always a plan. And I think that's one thing for myself. I always had a plan. I said, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And after coming back from London and studying comparative criminal justice there, and also getting more of the language around what I'm really passionate about, I still was at a loss. And it was really frustrating because all of my peers were getting into graduate school. They were going off to study for their LSAT exams. They were getting jobs. And here's Tatiana, the one that always has the plan, was just very lost and not sure what to do. So I had to revisit, what are the things that really bring me joy? What are the things that really spoke to why I wanted to do this work? And of course, at that time, I was still unsure, but I reached out to my support system and also to my professors who really supported me in this process. And they said, why don't you go to graduate school? And they also considered, okay, well, you can look at another fellowship or an internship. And that's what I did. So I applied for AmeriCorps and graduate school at the same time. And not sure which one I was going to get into first, but I ended up going into AmeriCorps, and I worked with the Center for Court Innovation, which is a nonprofit based here in New York City that works on criminal justice reform. And from there, I was also participating in graduate school full time. And as you can only imagine what that looked like, it was very stressful, but I was really able to focus on, okay, these are the things that bring me joy, and these are the things that are exciting for me. Hello, welcome. So in graduate school, I was studying human rights. And I'll also just name here that I only applied to one graduate school. So if I didn't get in, I wasn't quite sure what was going to be next, but I had the faith that I was going to be able to be put on the path that I need to be put on. And I was just really, really appreciative when I received that acceptance letter, because this was the only human rights program based in a CUNY school system at the time. And I believe it still is. So to be a part of that first cohort and the first graduating class of human rights within John Jay was just really powerful for me. And it spoke volumes to the work and to the students that would be following me in my footsteps. So I was just really excited about that and to share and witness that experience. So throughout graduate school, still figuring out what my next steps were, but also being able to really dive deeper into human rights and international human rights, and getting this framework around what the United Nations does and what are SDGs. And that definitely changed my scope and giving me more language that I was looking for in undergrad. And from there, I knew that SDG 16 was for me. And it aligned so much with how I was already on this path, with doing internships in undergrad, with going to study criminal justice within another country. That all aligned. And I was just really happy to see that things were falling into place at that time. Now, throughout graduate school and doing AmeriCorps, I still wanted to really make an impact in my community. And I was able to do more volunteer work. And I was able to do this by serving my community and helping provide free legal resources to Bronx, people that live in the Bronx. And this was more of the local perspective, where I'm able to see how these issues impact us every day. Now, often, we see that this is happening on a global scale, but how is it really impacting our people and our community locally? And that really fostered the trajectory of my next steps, and being able to look for an organization that really fostered these ideals that I wanted to implement within my career. And throughout my AmeriCorps service, I wasn't quite sure whether I would go on and find another job, or would I continue doing service locally, but I figured, hey, let me look for an organization that does something similar to this. And in that journey, I was able to find UNA USA. And from there, I have not left. I am still here in this role, and I really wanted to find an organization that looked at human rights, looked at criminal justice, looked at all these different things when it comes to international peace, when it comes to domestic work. And UNA USA really brought that for me. Now, I started off as a member. And then I was able to take on the lead as the chapter president for the Bronx. And I have been serving in this role for 2 years. And they offered an opportunity. So I was looking for more ways to just really immerse myself within SDG 16. I said, how can I do this? How can I do this? And UNA USA offered the opportunity for young professionals to become a Global Goals ambassador. And I applied, not quite sure whether I would get in. And come to find out, I was accepted. And I was really excited about that. Because that offered me a larger platform to really advocate and do the advocacy work that I'm really passionate about when it comes to criminal justice, when it comes to advocating for marginalized peoples, when it comes to just looking at also immigration as well. So, and I feel like SDG 16 does all of that. We know that the goals are very much interchangeable and they all intertwine and intersect in some ways, but I really was drawn closer to the work by being able to serve in this capacity. And as an SDG Global Goals ambassador, I was granted the opportunity to do speaking forums like this, to be a part of the third consultations that happens when the U.S. is brought to the United Nations to talk about be held accountable basically for racial discrimination here in the U.S. And a lot of the opportunities that I was afforded while being a Global Goals ambassador really was impacted my next steps and how I wanted to continue to explore what I want to do within my career as well. So as a Global Goals ambassador, you are given the opportunity to have speaking forums, also host projects and post in reference to SDG 16. So I took it upon myself to start a blog. And this blog is called The Untold Journeys. And this really spoke to why I wanted to start this. I think the title in itself just speaks to the journeys that we don't hear, the stories that we don't hear. And I specifically wanted to get the perspectives of persons that identify as Black or that are from the BIPOC communities. So that we can hear their stories and how they were able to get into this journey of working within international peace, of working within law, of working within humanitarian aid. And I think that growing up, I didn't have that opportunity to really see people that look like me in these spaces. And even so much now, right? So being able to start this blog and really hear from different persons that are experiencing this day to day really fuels me, and I hope that it will fuel other young persons like myself that are passionate about this work. So I definitely will share the link for some of the stories that I've already heard thus far if persons are interested. But ultimately in this role, that was something that I really wanted to start and focus on. And of course, the ambassadorship program grants the opportunity for you to work with other SDG ambassadors that are doing phenomenal work. So I'll drop the link in the chat for folks that may be interested in just hearing the other stories of SDG ambassadors as well, and that you can take a look at that to see like where their next steps are. So I'll briefly pause there. I know I spoke a lot, but I'm just sure if Stephanie has another question for me.
Yeah, so thank you first of all, just for that awesome overview. It's great to hear a little bit more kind of about some of the work that you've been doing and how you've gotten to where you are at this point. I'm really familiar with UNA because I'm a member of my local chapter and was on the board of directors, but I don't necessarily know if everyone else does know what UNA. So would you do a little bit to expand upon what UNA is as an organization and just kind of give folks a bit of an idea of like what, because I mean, most of the people here are coming probably from a psychology lens, but so kind of that, I guess, the interprofessional nature of UNA, with you in mind.
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for naming that, Stephanie. So UNA USA, and I like to describe this organization, especially when I'm working with other persons that are just not familiar with it. I just tell them that we definitely do a lot of work around advocacy. We are a mobilization of multiple chapters all across the United States that focuses on the vital work of the United Nations and empowering people to know and educating them to know what the work of the United Nations does. Now, every organization is different, whether they do programming, whether they're doing volunteer opportunities, but ultimately we are mobilizing and doing advocacy work around the United Nations and ensuring that our Congress people are doing a lot of powerful work when it comes to implementing issues that are impacted by everyone within our own communities. So it's just a lot of doing the vital work of the United Nations and also a lot of advocacy work. So that's a lot of what UNA USA does. And I think that we all take different shapes and form in the work in itself, but ultimately the goal is achieved in the same way.
So you wouldn't, so basically, I mean, you come from this sort of like criminal justice and law and human rights mindset, but really anybody could get involved, right? Like it doesn't matter for like
Anyone, yeah, and we are actually in a transition of like membership when it comes to like the age wise, but you can start off, I believe, at 18, and it's free for young persons as well. So up until 25, you are a free member, and anyone can join. You just have to look up within whichever state you're located in to see if there's a chapter. I also encourage you, if there isn't a chapter in your state, start. I definitely encourage to start a chapter. Whether if even if you're still in school, you can go ahead and start a chapter as well. They have campus chapters within universities, so it's highly encouraged. And you'll meet so many wonderful people, like how I was able to meet Stephanie.
Thank you for those additional comments. I know that you have a lot of other things to say, but I just want to open it up in case Whitney or Anapriya or Andres have any questions or comments to add in here.
Yeah, I have a question. So, first of all, thank you so much for opening up and sharing your journey. I'm an international student in the US. I'm also in New York. And my question is about like, the financial return on investment, like when you invest in your education through the years, have you been able to make that back? And do you see scope for, opportunities that can help sustain someone in the city?
That is an amazing question. And I think it's difficult, right? Because when you think about just like school in itself, hi, it's lovely to see your face. When you think about school itself, I think to be fully transparent, like you're paying so much, right, to go to school. And then when you graduate, it's like, okay, what are the next steps? Like, am I gonna get a job that's gonna really support and also, and you mentioned you're living in the US and you're an international student. I can only imagine, right, the difficulties that come with just funding yourself and then also just being able to, have a good social life. So I think part of just my answer in that is yes, I have been able to, and I think it was more so me being strategic about where I want to see myself within a particular organization. So, and I'll just go a little bit into that. So within after undergrad, I was able to do some internships and AmeriCorps. It didn't completely, and I don't know if you know much about AmeriCorps, but AmeriCorps does not pay much. So I had to really think about, okay, how can I survive? And ultimately, I did have a good support system, but how can I be able to survive and support myself? And of course, I had to work another job just to be able to, meet my necessary needs, my daily needs. But that also supported with the funding of my education for grad school. So that was really helpful because I was able to outsource and do a lot of communicating with the financial department and saying, hey, I don't have this, but are you able to support? Are there any scholarships? And that really helped with the funding of like my degrees. Now, when it comes to after graduate school, looking for a job, that was quite hard. I did work in another space, and of course, like my salary wasn't as high as I would have liked, but I knew that I had to start somewhere. So I would definitely say that I feel like now I am seeing it. In the beginning, I didn't. And I think that's just like a real question that you have to have with yourself, is whether you are okay with being in that space of, okay, I have to cut back on certain things, to sacrifice a bit and know that, okay, like, the financial return will come back as I move further up the ladder in my career. Unfortunately, that is the case for most of us. And I realize, just doing a lot of saving and then also just like negotiating when it comes to pay, that has really been helpful for me. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I have a follow-up.
Yeah,
Literally
of
the
course.
last line you said about negotiating about pay. Um, because I know that so often fields in like peace or psychology and the humanities and advocacy, they're underfunded, and then you want to, use all that money allocated to helping those who are more needy. So often in such underfunded career spaces, even to sometimes ask for more money or to negotiate might come off as, you're just having completely off expectations. Like, if you want to make more money, go work in corporate. This is not the place where you ask for more. And then, especially as a woman, because women anyway negotiate less. So I sometimes feel like, with what claim, with what face, with what mouth do I ask for more when I already know this whole thing is underfunded in the first place?
Yeah, so let me just make sure I heard the question. So just in reference to like negotiating, like, are you asking like how I was able to do that?
Yeah, I feel like in the field itself, and maybe it's contextual with the organization you work at, knowing that, okay, this organization has enough funding and has enough support to be able to shell out more money and give me
Mhm.
more. So I'm just saying, like, it's field specific. I think in the corporate sector, there's more money, so you can ask for more money without any shame or second guessing. Whereas in advocacy, I think there's more second guessing because the money in the first place is less in the field. So how do you reconcile with that decision making, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for bringing more clarity to that. Yeah, I do agree. Like, that process for me was quite difficult. Like, I won't sit here and say, oh, like it was super easy. Like, no, in my first space, like where I was prior to doing work in immigration with UNA USA, I was really not negotiating at all. Like, I was just like, I don't really know how to ask for this. But I realized that my experiences and the work that I've done in the past can meet those needs to ask for what I want. I know that it's like morality, right? Like, okay, do you ask for this knowing that, the money needs to go elsewhere, or do you just transition to another organization? That's the difficult part. And I still battle with it now, but I really had to say, okay, I know my worth, right? And I know that I deserve to have this amount of pay. And understandably, like if they say no, someone else, or I can go to move to another organization and they will be able to work with me. And of course, I'm still in the very beginning stages of this, and I'm really happy to like speak more about it as well. But I had to do this in my most recent job, and I was terrified. And my friends were just like, you need to ask for more. And I'm just like, no, I'm just going to stick with like, I'm just going to shout out a number, but like 55, I'm just going to stick with 55. That's fine. And they're like, no, go for it. Go for at least 60 and see what they say, and then from there you can go back and forth. And I think if you know that you are doing a lot of work within your own space right now, and you have like the proof to show for it, and I know they always say you need a lot of experience, but that comes with time. But also just like in that interview, once you make it to that interview stage, you can really wow them, right, in that portion. And then from there, you can be like, okay, this is what I want. But also just understandably knowing like, what is the average pay for that role too? Don't be super optimistic in that way, because, you want to be realistic and say, okay, well, if the pay is only like 60, I'm not going to go and say I want 80 for it, That's just my own opinion, because I know,
That
again, like
makes
I'm still in
sense.
the very
Yeah.
beginning stages of it, but I just want to be really
Yeah.
realistic. Like, okay, what do I know that I can
Mm.
get? I
Makes
really
so
do.
much sense.
Yeah, yeah. Thank
Thank you.
you. And please ask more questions. I would be happy to speak more about that.
Yeah, any other questions? Hi, Wendy, and welcome. Any other questions? So you kind of hint, well, I don't want to get off track. I don't know if there are more kind of prepared comments you had before we get like off on random tangents. but otherwise I have random tangents. So
Okay. So I'll briefly just go in a little bit more about like the work that I'm doing with UNA USA, because I know that I stopped there just because that was getting into the next question. Yes, I do serve as the chapter president for UNA USA in the Bronx, and also as the former Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 16, which I'm still doing a lot of work in that field. I feel that that never ends. Once I'm very much attached to the work of peace, that for me comes and shows up in different forms. And in this specific way, it has now transitioned into the immigration work that I'm currently doing, where I work with Safe Passage Project. And this is a nonprofit organization here in New York City where we help young people who are facing deportation. And a lot of my work is supporting the pro bono department, and I'm able to just learn a little bit more about the the U.S. immigration system and how young people are impacted by that. And this something that is near and dear to me, just coming from a parent that is an immigrant as well. So just being able to see the process and being able to help young people in some capacity really all circles back to the work that I initially wanted to do anyway. So I say all of that to say that even in your journeys, you may say, okay, I want to do this particular thing, and then you end up doing something completely different. It will come back full circle once you know that this is what you want to do ultimately. And now also within UNA USA, I also serve as a newly elected member to the National Council. So that's a lot of thank you so much, different opportunities there. So I think UNA USA in itself, just being a member in different capacities and being able to serve in different roles really has supported me in my journey, right? And being able to share that with you all just inspires me even more, because I know that just after this conversation, you may have a spark to say, okay, well, what do I want to do next in my career? You may even consider joining UNA USA, which I also super encourage. So that is a bit about just like my career right now, and also the work that I'm doing with UNA USA.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So you mentioned before, and this kind of was related to your special project when you were SDG Global Goals Ambassador. Could you talk a little bit more about Untold Journeys and how that, I guess, like how that came to be for you, and then also just, I guess, the intersection of peace. And I know that it sounds like that was kind of like a blog project, but how that also might intersect with people who have research interests, because I think there are some researchers in this group too.
Yes, so thank you so much for bringing it back up. So Untold Journeys, I definitely struggled with, okay, what do I want to focus on specifically when it comes to me in this role? And something that stood out for me was that, okay, growing up, I was not seeing a lot of people that look like me in this space. And I think we can be very open and say, okay, that's the United Nations. When you look at who's in the room, you don't often see a lot of people of color, especially Black women within that space and within those spaces. And I wanted to be able to look to say, okay, how can I really share these journeys or the stories of persons that are doing this work on the ground? And I realized the journey itself is untold, right? My journey, you being able to ask me to share my journey to this work is in itself, for me, super inspiring. And the reason behind why I wanted to start this blog, to share more stories about people that are not being able to share their stories. So I struggled so much behind, okay, how do I go about this? Do I do a blog? Do I, and a lot of it also stemmed from the fact that within the fellowship, we had to do monthly posts on international related issues. So I said, hey, how can I do both? How can I share the stories of people that are doing this work already, and then also current related issues that are happening? And from that, I was able to really find so many people within my collective that are doing this work. And I think being a part of UNA USA as well has really introduced me to different persons that can share these perspectives. So that's a lot about like how I started it and realizing, okay, I really want for this to be bigger than me. Right? I want for this to inspire, to encourage, and to really empower someone else that is from the Bronx or from another part of the world that really wants to be able to hear the stories and journeys from someone that looks like them or that shares lived experiences as them. So I definitely, I do be very transparent. I took a bit of a hiatus, just mental health things and just being like, had to be more grounded with myself. And I think that's a real thing as well. Like when we talk about mental health, we have to really think about like how we're overworking sometimes and getting through burnout. Like that definitely, I experienced that in a lot of my different positions. So I took a break, but now being able to say, okay, I want to revisit this again because it brings me so much joy to know that, okay, I'm not alone in this process. And a lot of the conversations is not solely just about their work, right? It's talking about how do they get to where they're at. It's talking about how do they really put self-care within themselves to say, okay, I'm going to take a break from, this case that I'm working on, and I'm really going to just like focus on me. Right. And that's really the journey itself. It's not solely on, okay, well, this is the work that you're doing and this is what my day-to-day job looks like. Yes, we want to know those things, but I also want to know, how do you really focus on you too? Like what brings you joy? Like, I just want to bring it back to the more human perspective, just because, we're all doing this work and we're all working so hard, but like, how do you really stay grounded in this as well? So that's a lot of what the Untold journeys are. And I'm really excited to share this all with you. And hopefully you find some joy in reading the stories and just being empowered, and finding some joy in it as well.
That is awesome. And I think, well, as a peace psychology group, like the mental health stuff, we're like, yes, like peace work doesn't always make us feel very peaceful. I mean, that's the reality of it. And just, some of the just demands of, schedules and all of that. So thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that.
You're welcome.
Anyone have any follow-ups at this point or anything to interject?
I can ask something real quick. I think you might actually end up touching on this anyway.
Okay.
My question is kind of about the journey, right? And the ways in which our careers, and you've talked about this a little bit, the ways in which our careers can shift and change over time, and the focus of it can change and shift over time. So my question is, how do you see thematically your profession taking you into different areas? And I think you talked about a couple of different areas that your job has already taken you to, but like, what are other frontiers that you can see for yourself?
So I'm loving all of these questions. And I think, with us being in a new month and then transitioning into a new year, I always just tell myself every time I am looking for a new position or just in this space of like, I need a change, I go back to this. So I'll share, I have a document that I write down, okay, these are all the things that I've done. This is where I want to go. This is where I see myself going. Right. And I think I always have to find myself going back to that and just see myself grounded in that. Right. And saying, okay, this is what my next steps will look like. How do I get here? And that's been really helpful in each of my positions, because there are times where I feel completely stuck. There are times where I'm like, okay, well, I know that I want to get here, but I'm not sure how I'm going to get here. Now, I often say that I do want to go to law school, and that is, and I love the face with me. I love the face. But I realize, ultimately, realistically, we have, and I think that goes back to the question that we had earlier when it comes to the financial gain, right? Like, what does that look like, the financial return and investment? Like, what does that look like for myself? So right now, and if I'm being fully transparent, I see myself somewhere in a higher position. I don't know what that looks like right now because I take it step by step by step. But ultimately, all of the roles that I've been in have always afforded me a new opportunity. And that's what I'm also really grateful for. Through all of the networking, through the times of where I'm doing speaking engagements, I'm able to meet with different people that are all still within the international human rights space, the peace space, and just being able to say, okay, I think I want to go on this trajectory next. And sometimes it's not always straightforward for me, right? There's not always, okay, check a checklist of the things that I'm gonna do, because I've had to throw that away a long time ago. I just always go back to, okay, this is what I'm excited about. Let's focus on this first. So I really appreciate the question, and I'm sorry if I'm not able to fully say, okay, well, this is my next step, just because I've always just been able to just lead in faith and know that whatever's coming for me and whatever opportunities are out there for me, they're going to come my way. And I think that's just the most grounding way that I can really answer that in this moment.
No, it's a good answer. And my mother always said, what's for you is for you.
Exactly.
Yep. So keep an open mind and kind of see what lands in your lap.
Yeah. And and I'll also say as well, like, yes, law school is still something that I have in the part of the dream and part of the journey. Right. But there's no saying, okay, like, is it going to happen this year or next year? And I think my support system and the people that hold me accountable, they're like, well, you need to set a date. So I'm like, I understand that, right? And I think that's all a part of the journey as well. Like, you can set dates for yourself, but so many things happen within a year, right? So how can you really be like, okay, this is going to happen in this time? And everyone's different, right? Like, I always was that person say, okay, it has to happen in this moment. But I also realized things don't move that way. Life doesn't move that way either.
Something that really occurred to me as you were kind of sort of thinking about your next steps, and it kind of connected back to sort of your storytelling and just the goal of really focusing on storytelling for people whose voices aren't always heard, really made me think about just the importance too, in terms of like advancing careers and building our careers, is making sure that like we're either telling our own story or we're helping others to tell their stories, because that might be the thing that shifts something. That might be somebody might watch this recording and be like, wow, I want to pay $1 bazillion to Tatiana, or I want to hire, Wendiam, or I want to, whatever, it might be. And so I think that just really made me think about not only the importance of the work that you're doing in terms of like global peace, but also just in terms of helping, various groups of people to take those steps for themselves. So I'm just loving that. Thanks.
You're welcome. Also, I just want to go back to Wendy's question. So oftentimes when I'm realizing, okay, like there's times where I know that I want to transition into different space. And I mentioned, like, I have a document where I revisit my goals and like the things that I'm really interested in and things that I want to do. I also look for opportunities within that time to really advance my skills. So I realized, yes, like I am doing all these different roles, but it's also difficult for me to like put the language behind, okay, how did this really, is this project management, is this program management, and things of that sort. So I always try to find opportunities that really enhance my own professional development, so that when it is that time to move on to the next role, I can say, okay, I have did all these things and I'm able to actually do the work that you're asking me to do. So I hope that also adds just some insight to your initial question.
Any additional questions or comments while we're at a quick pause here? All right, Tatiana, what else do you have for us?
I love that. So I know this is a very intimate session and there's no other questions. And I think right now, as far as like tips and advice, I don't know if you want to go into that. Yeah. So I realize I'm always asking for tips and advice from professionals that are in this space. So just to be able to share some of the things that I have been doing or that have worked for me, it's just really empowering as well, because I don't know where you are in your journeys. But I will share that as far as tips goes, I would highly recommend, if there's someone within the peace space that you really look up to ask them, or just to have a short conversation with them, to be your mentor. I didn't realize the power of mentorship until more recently, but I was able to find someone that was a part of UNA USA who has really, really empowered me. And from that moment, I knew that I wanted for them to be my mentor. And from this day, they have really been supporting me and really encouraging me to move forward in my goals. So finding a mentor is like something that's really important. I know that you may hear this so much often, but it's so important. And I think that it really highlights just like the things that you can learn from someone else that's already in the space that you would like to be in, or that you currently are in. And the next thing is, writing down your goals. I think that's really important. I feel like, some of these may sound cliche, but ultimately I found throughout the years, when I write down the things that I'm really, really invested in, that I'm really interested in is really supported in like reframing and regrounding myself. So going back to the document that I have, it really says, okay, well, I want to do this and I want to do that. Okay, so how do I do those things, right? Who do I need to connect with? And being able to really look back at this document and look back at what I'm really interested in has really fueled my next steps. It's been able, and it pushed me to say, okay, I'm going to reach out to this particular person. Now, one thing that I did not mention that I talk about so heavily within the Untold Journeys is imposter syndrome. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it, but I found myself saying, I feel like I'm moving through this a lot of times, even when we're talking about negotiating for salary and pay, when we're talking about applying for a job, even just taking on speaking engagements. And I think ultimately we have to be very real with ourselves. And like when we're moving through these things, how do we move past it? That's one. And then how do we say, okay, like we're going to start over or just move on to the next thing? And imposter syndrome has really impacted me in so many different ways in my journey. I will not sit here and say that I have never had imposter syndrome. Like, no, it has definitely impacted me in so many ways that I'm like, okay, what are my next steps? So just being able to move past imposter syndrome and then also saying, okay, what do you want to do with the rest of your career? How can you speak to people and negotiate with people or just like network with people has really also empowered me as well. And then I think the last thing is also just like when we talk about mental health, I feel like that is really essential just to anything that you do, because your mind and your body and your soul, like you need that to continue to move forward in this work. So there are times where I just completely just shut off. And I think Stephanie can attest to this, where I was like, I am so sorry. I have to, like, I was not able to reach back out quickly enough. And I'm just really just so grateful just for the patience that they have provided. But I think being able to really just be grounded with yourself and do a lot of self-care practices really will support you in any next step that you have for yourself. So those three things of just like mentorship and being able to do a lot of self-care work and writing down your goals have really supported me in all of the things that I'm doing. So I hope that helps in just your next steps and in your goals and what you want to do within this career.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I appreciate you.
And we did have a couple people who had to hop off, so there were just some words of gratitude in the chat. If you
Yes. No, of course, I appreciate that. I know that we're in different time zones, so I just am very appreciative of anyone that's been able to join and stay on the line.
Yeah, well, thank you for those words of wisdom. They all resonate with me for sure and are very important reminders. So I see we've got somebody joining us here. But yeah, I think when you talk a little bit about the writing things down, that just sometimes we kind of forget like who we are or where we're going because we just have been so busy or inundated with like the things that we're doing. And sometimes we find these gems where like, oh my gosh, I was thinking about this years ago, and turns out I still am, and I just forgot that it's been important to me for this long.
Yeah, that's happened to me so many times. Like, and I think part of the writing the things down is just a reminder of like where you have come from and where you're going. So I think just to like Whitney's question, and when they asked like, what are the next steps? I'm just like, okay, well, this is everything that I have done. And I'm really confident and just and like excited about where I'm going, but I don't know what that looks like next, right? And like they mentioned, like what is for you is for you. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. So being able to just like revisit the things that I've done, and sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that. I didn't even remember that I did that, So it's just a reminder and a testament to your story.
Another piece that you touched on was the importance of finding a mentor. And, I don't know how many mentorship experiences you've had. And it sounds like maybe the UNA one kind of happened organically as opposed to being like an assigned formal mentor. But do you have any thoughts or insights on how to go about finding those mentorships, whether formally or informally?
Sure, yeah. So yes, it was very much organically, which and that's why I said in my journey, the opportunities, they do arise at the right time and space. But when it comes to just like organizations that offer mentorship programs, I have come across a lot of them. And when I was initially told like, hey, you should consider looking for a mentor, I didn't know what that process would look like for me. Again, because moving through imposter syndrome, there was no way that I can reach out to anyone and ask, there was no way of me like saying, oh, like, it was just a lot of fear. So being able to find organizations that offer that opportunity. And I know that there's one that does do that, and I can put the link in the chat. So I believe it's Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. They do offer a really well-known like mentorship program that you can apply for. But I would encourage to look at organizations, even within the peace space, right? And see if they offer a mentorship program or if something related to it. And if they do, you can go ahead and apply there. But if not, I think for me, the organic relationship that I was able to forge was by looking at leaders within the space already, and just seeing how, and just setting up a call, right? Like that's exactly what I did. I already had said it. I manifested. I said, this particular person is going to be my mentor. And from the moment I saw them, I said, I want them to be my mentor. And I told them that. But, that was after we were able to really get to know each other. But organically that did happen. And I was just really just grateful for it. But if there's someone that you say, okay, I would really like to learn a little bit more about them, you can be able to just really invite them to a conversation. I think people, they love to share a lot about themselves. That's something that I've learned early on. But you can be able just to invite them for a conversation, just to learn a little bit more about their work. And I think asking the question, that's the difficult part. And I think that's what you're hinting at as well. It's very difficult. And for me, fortunately, yes, it was organic, but that was so hard for me to even begin that conversation. So I realized that I had to, really get to know them a little bit more and see what their capacity is like. And I think kind of in a way, when you're doing negotiating for your pay, you're asking for what you want. So I realized maybe even in those conversations of mentorship, maybe there's a way that you can intertwine that and say, hey, is this something that you have capacity for? Are you taking on mentors at this time? And, the worst thing they can say is no. And then you can be able to, do that search again to see if there's someone else that you really would like to have underneath in your corner.
I so love how just like considerate you were in asking too, like, are you taking on mentees? Because I think sometimes we forget that people are really busy and that they, their schedules are packed. But what I also love about that is that maybe they are at capacity and they can't take on somebody, but just having that question, they might say, but I have this colleague or I have this connection, and that could be the doorway as well. So, even if you look at somebody who seems so busy and they're doing all this stuff, you can still initiate that conversation, because they might be able to connect you to somebody who's even more in the area that you're trying to get to. So I just really appreciate that way of approaching it.
Exactly. And Stephanie, how did you know?
Because she's everywhere and she's just this force, I mean, I first encountered her because of the Great Lakes region. Yeah. And she was leading this call, and I just left the meeting like, man, like, there are some really cool people involved in this stuff. And, I mean, I just see her name coming up a lot in the mailings and stuff. I know she's on the council and stuff too. So, well, that's awesome. Congrats.
Yeah, we love London. Yes, that is correct. But like you mentioned, that they definitely can also have other persons that they can refer you to. And I think that is also just a part of just moving past any fears that you may have and just asking the question. And just, also knowing that everyone is busy. I mean, I've had spaces where, there was other people that I was like, oh, maybe I can ask them. And they actually told me, yeah, they didn't have the capacity. And I was okay with that. And I believe UNA USA does offer a mentorship as well, like once you join. I was a part of that for a brief second in the beginning stages of my journey with UNA USA, where they match you. So there are opportunities to be matched by another person, and just see where that flows. And I do have a mentor through that as well. And they are currently they've graduated from law school, and have passed the bar. So I'm really proud of them as well. So I have two mentors. And then of course, through relationships that I've forged throughout my time with UNAUSA, I've been adopted as a mentee to other persons as well. So those happen organically, right? I think having the conversations with people, really being your true authentic self and just showing up the way that you feel authentically, you're able to really make connections with people. And then from there, they will just take you right on as your mentee.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times people just don't realize that people are looking, you know, I mean, and they don't necessarily realize that people are looking for mentorship, or I also think that there's just these ways sometimes that like they might like, oh, wow, I could really benefit from like working with somebody on this project. Like that would be a great way for me to, you know, allow them to build some capacity while also taking a little bit of the work off of their plate too. So it can be a win-win.
Exactly. And like you, and then I think what a lot of students here, they're doing a lot of research. So like even in those spaces, well, as you're doing research work with even professors or just someone else within this peace space, through those conversations, you'll be able to know if they have the capacity for it. So all of those things I definitely affirm and agree with.
So we have just a few minutes left in time. And Sophia, thank you so much for hopping in. I don't know if you have any questions that you'd like to add here for Tatiana.
No, it's fine. Thank you. I'm just listening.
Okay.
Hi, Sophia. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So Tatiana, do you have any sort of, you know, closing thoughts or final thoughts to kind of share with us to wrap things up?
Of course. So firstly, I would just like to say thank you so much for inviting me. This has been a very empowering just moment for me just to speak about my journey. And it also speaks to just my professional development as well, and just being able to say, okay, how have I really been able to work within this space? And also regrounding myself and saying, okay, this is what I've done this far, and so much more will come from me in this way. I think just in closing, I would like to share with anyone that's watching this video and recording that you are on the path of so much, right? I think that taking your time and knowing what you're really passionate about and being able to do that work authentically will really speak to your journey. And oftentimes you may feel lost in that process, but just know that there's someone out there that has gone through the same thing, and you're going to find them and be able to connect with them, or just within your own spaces, and be able to learn so much about yourself, and also knowing that you'll have some next steps coming your way. So I do appreciate just being able to be in this space and talk about a little bit more about myself and my journey within the peace space. And I hope that we'll be able to connect later on in the future.
Thank you so much for joining us and for offering this great talk. It's been really interesting to hear more about your story and just, you know, how, like all of the different ways that it could have gone and then how it did go. And, you know, and it's really just the beginning, you know, there's so much more to come, like you said.
Yes, I always say that it's really just the beginning. And I realize there's so much that I've probably left out. And like my journey has been like filled with so many experiences.
Mhm. Yeah, but we're just really grateful that you've taken the time and offered a lot of great ideas and resources. So there were a couple of different sort of like links or organizations that you mentioned. So I would love to follow up with you after the fact to gather those links. And then when I send out this recording, I can include some of those links to different organizations or the blog or other things that you mentioned along the way. Does that sound all right?
Yes, it does. I would greatly appreciate that. And if there's any other questions that may come up, please be sure to share them with me. I'll be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. I wish you the best for this winter season. And I hope that all of our paths cross again. It was wonderful to talk with you.
It was such a pleasure, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.